Well, the governor added new restrictions for the state of Arizona today that'll force more Arizonans to stay home. And some people have already been cooped up for a couple of weeks now and might be going a little stir crazy. One person who knows about isolating is astronaut Mark Kelly. He spoke with our Brandon Lee today about some useful tips we can all apply right now to help keep us sane. Our Brandon Lee joining us live from his home studio tonight with some of these tips to help us out. Hey there.
Hey, Heather, good to see you on a Friday night. Yeah, I thought what a fascinating perspective to get, right? Talking to an astronaut. This guy has been launched into space 4 different times. Mark Kelly knows all about going under quarantine. He knows all about being isolated, being separated from the people he loves the most, his family and his friends. So I thought to myself, okay, what better person to ask to get better perspective as we all now enter this next phase of quarantine and isolation? Does Mark Kelly have any tips for any of us as we try to make it through this with our own sanity? Here's part of my conversation with the former astronaut.
Before you go into space, you're in quarantine. So quarantine on Earth. So I've done that a number of times. So I know a little bit about what it's like. I think it's important that you have a certain kind of approach to this experience.
What would be some advice that you could give just the average Arizonan right now who is in quarantine or they are isolating in this whole social distancing thing? Any tips or any advice?
Well, one thing is I think it's really important that you try to maintain a schedule, to get up at a certain time, to not lose those other things that you had in your life before, like a certain wake up time, doing certain things during the day, and to try to follow that schedule to some extent, but at the same time, try to inject some variety, make sure you get some exercise, if that's something you would normally do before we had to isolate ourselves. So I would say that's important. Also try to find some kind of a hobby, something to occupy that free time, maybe try to learn something new, maybe become better at photography, learn a new language. Crew members that spend a lot of time in space, they try to bring some sort of a hobby with them. I'd say most importantly is to try to stay connected. When we're on the International Space Station, it's really important that we stay connected with friends and family on the ground. Here, when we're isolated in our houses or an apartment, we can do the same thing.
You know, again, so really a fascinating perspective, right, to a guy who's been launched into space 4 different times. I did ask Mark Kelly, how's his health? How's his wife's health? Of course, Gabby Giffords, who was shot in that mass shooting back in 2011. He says both he and his wife, Gabby, they're doing great right now. They get up every single morning. He says Gabby's out on her bike outdoors every single day. He's usually on the treadmill. Their daughter, Claire, is actually moved back in with them during quarantine. She's working from the house, and she, too, is part of their morning routine, getting all that exercise in. Coming up tonight on the News at 9, I do talk to Mark Kelly about the governor's latest executive order, bringing down the essentials list, the business list here in Arizona, get his thoughts on that. And also he has a message for those people who have lost their jobs since this pandemic hit us here in Arizona. But I'll have that much more of our conversation tonight on 3TV News at 9.
All good advice from an expert, Brandon, for sure.